nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika.
Francis Koster. I was a surveyor in Tanganyika 5. I was posted in the Singida region, and along with a couple of other people, and we lived often in tents in the bush to create a new road that was going to provide farm to market. I was kicked out of then Tanganyika because I assisted in the birth of a Muslim woman. And so I was only in Tanganyika for about 5 months. Mm-hmm. And after going through an investigation in Washington to determine that I hadn't done anything wrong, I was reposted to Sierra Leone, West Africa, and subsequently served on the training staff at Chicago University, Roosevelt University in Chicago, and then College of the West Indies. My name is Francis Koster. I was trained at Syracuse University and was part of Tanganyika either 4 or 5. I think it was 5. I was evicted from the nation of Tanganyika before it became Tanzania because I participated in an emergency birth along with several other volunteers. And it turns out the woman whose baby was involved was a Muslim woman, and crossed many cultural barriers. The story is that my 2 surveying partners, Americans, trained at Syracuse, we were surveying in the bush and living out in tents, and on the weekend we would go visit the American Peace Corps women that were an hour or so away. And we were sleeping on their concrete living room floor, and they were in charge of the hospital, which was located across the street. And there was a signaling mechanism between the hospital across the street and these Peace Corps nurses, such that at night, if something went wrong, the Peace Corps nurse could go over to be helpful. There was no doctor on duty. One night while we were there, the nurse got an urgent message, and I don't know whether they did it with lights or flags or whatever, but at night in that little town, the hyenas would come in packs to eat the garbage that was simply thrown out in the street, and it was not safe to go out after dark in the street, particularly late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. So I was asked to escort her across the street with some weapon, and I don't remember whether it was a gun or a machete or a pole or whatever, but she did not feel safe crossing the street by herself. And so I got up and got dressed and accompanied her across the street. And she entered a small room, maybe 8 foot by 10 feet or 12 feet, which had 2 women in it on cots, both of which were in labor. She had an assistant, a young Tanganyikan nurse aide, who was probably 15 years old and was pregnant but hadn't told anybody. And at that time, there was no electricity in the hospital. Everything was done with kerosene lights, and so there was something called a Tilly lamp, which is like an American-style Coleman lantern, but it just burned kerosene. And it had a reflector on it, so you could aim the beam. And the woman who was most close to birth was a breech delivery or some other kind of medical problem that required Gay to perform what's called an episiotomy, which is where the vagina is expanded by a scissors cut. And that allows the vagina to expand, and the baby's, if it's a large head or something, can come out. And so Gay, the nurse, inserted the scissors to do this, with the Tanganyikan nurse shining the light on the birth mother, such the job could be done safely. And upon seeing the cut, the Tanganyikan nurse fainted with the kerosene lantern, and it broke. It was a glass lantern. And so the kerosene caught fire, and Gay Singer was standing there with the scissors in a woman in the dark with kerosene on the floor burning, and she screamed for help. And I, after checking with her, she in fact wanted me to enter the birth room. She pleaded for me to come in and help out, so I rushed in. removed the Tanganyika nurse, or got her up, and anyway, she vanished from the scene. And I got another light, and I had to hold it so that Gay could tend to this bleeding mother. As that happened, the second mother gave birth, and there was an umbilical cord around the neck of the baby. I have to tell you that I was a virgin at the time. I had never seen a woman's vagina, and to walk in and see the blood and the scissors and the birth, and so it was pretty overwhelming. I turned to the second mother, and I saw what happened, and I told Gay and said, "What should I do?" And she said, "Take it off." So I quickly took the umbilical cord off the baby's neck, and the baby came out, and I spanked it like you see on television, and I gave it to the mother, who was totally freaked out because she'd been watching the fire on the floor and Gay cutting another woman, and I mean, that was not something that the second mother would have anticipated. And I comforted her. And later I had to hold the light while Gay stitched up the first mother, and then I went home. And I wrote a letter to my own mother, who was a mother of 6, celebrating the miracle of childbirth and what I had seen and what I had been through. And I mailed it. And several days later, I was arrested, put in jail. Next morning I went over to the hospital ward and took pictures of both mothers and their babies with the nurse, Miss Singer, behind them, proudly showing. And I posted the pictures for development, and I went back off into the bush, and was a couple days later, 2 weeks later, was arrested under the rumor that I had blinded babies. But I didn't know what the rumor was. An American Peace Corps official came and got me out of jail, ordered me into a van.
But you have to explain how he got you out.
Oh, okay.
The whole thing, yes.
I was trying to go fast. So I was put in the custody of a very low on the totem pole jailer who put me in a room and locked the door, and then brought me a typewriter and told me I should type out my version of events. But the typewriter had rusted. It wasn't used. And so before I could do that, I called him and said, "I can't do this because," and he said, "Well, you're the engineer, you fix it," or something like that. So I proceeded to take the typewriter apart and polish all the keys which had rusted together. And I had them laid out because in the order in which I took the machine apart, it almost looked like a parts catalog, okay? I remember that very clearly. And as I'm doing this, a black Peace Corps staff member, very large man, I came to believe he was an ex-football player, came in and thundered out, "Bring me the prisoner." And he basically intimidated the jailer into bringing me out. And then said, essentially to the jailer, "Give me your receipt book." And the jailer said, "Why?" And he said, "I'm taking your prisoner. You want a receipt, don't you?" And so he established dominance over this guy, and the guy gave him a receipt form, and they signed a piece of paper, and I was ordered to get in the vehicle, and I had not a clue what was going on, why I was arrested, nothing. And in the van was Trish Singer and Gay, whose name I'm going to block on. Gay, Singer, and Trish. And they were anxiously looking out the back window of the vehicle. And I asked what they were worried about, and they said, "We think there's a mob coming to burn our house down. They've been at our house. We think they're coming here." And so we thundered out of there. And I don't have many recollections of the drive after that, except it was a very long drive. And then we were put on an airplane without an investigation happening in Dar es Salaam that I have any memory of. And as I recall, I was sent home and then called to Washington. And when I went to Washington, I had a copy of the letter that I had written my mother. And when I got to Washington, they had a board of inquiries, or the courts-martial about, because they were trying to investigate, had I done something wrong. And I told them 3 things. I was active in working in the hospital. They had pit privies at the end of the ward that had overflowed and were covered with maggots, and there was no physical barrier between the pit privies and the ward, so disease was, I mean, it was awful. And so as a volunteer, I was cleaning that up. I would go up there on weekends when I was there to visit, and I was investigating a water supply for the hospital. And I'd even written my church to ask for monies to see if they could help me plumb the hospital. And the other thing is, I had this letter from my mother. So they asked me to tell the story, and I told it much as I have just told you. And then I had this letter that I had written my mother, which was a spiritual experience. I mean, I recorded on the miracle of birth and what I had understood now she went through with her 6 and so on. And they asked to see the letter, and I gave it to them, and they asked me to step out of the room, and I did. And when I came back, they called me back in later and said that I would meet with a woman, a Peace Corps official, and she would let me know the outcome. And when I visited with her, she said I was going to be sent back to Sierra Leone, sent to Sierra Leone, another country in Africa.
You also said something about the picture. I need you to tell the camera about the picture with the red eye.
Okay, you're going to have to re-sequence this. The pictures that I had sent off at the local general store, Duca, had come back, and one of the clerks or the owner of the store had opened the pictures and seen the babies, you know, and the mother with red eyes caused by the flash when you take a picture. And those pictures were reproduced and circulated throughout the area as examples of the fact that I had blinded the child. And so that was all going on, and I was totally oblivious to it. So even when I was, detained and put in the police station and stuff, I didn't have any idea.
Ningekuwa malaika